Afternoon. Oh, God. Good afternoon, everyone. So we come to an end of another fantastic facets. This has been the first time I've been able to attend the conference, so I'm really excited to be here and kind of see everything happen and just see like all these interesting and exciting conversations. So today's keynote, our second keynote, is about data-driven storytelling. And we have a fantastic panel here, and I'll be introducing them briefly. Just to sort of ground the conversation, I had a lot of trouble understanding how to engage with data when I shifted from film to design. And I just found data to be really vast and opaque and something that I couldn't process visually. Um, but data affects our lives, and it's just a thing that you can't really ignore. And so I kept trying to like push at it and try to find ways that I could engage with it. Um, I think the thing that helped me understand data was not so much visualizations of it, but the story of data. And the idea that data can sometimes overtake the reality of the things that it's talking about. I noticed this while doing some work with climate scientists and making games about doing climate science and kind of the dehumanizing nature of like science and data sometimes. But I'm really excited about the sort of breadth that data gives us in the context of storytelling. And I also feel like it's a thing we should talk about from the point of view of biases and how sometimes like the way we're beholden to technology, we're often beholden to the promise of objectivity in data. And this allows designers and storytellers' biases to flourish. And I think we can sometimes flatten the diverse topography of data-driven information when we focus too much on the data and not so much from where it comes from. I'm just going to pull up a... Can I just connect? Yeah. Awesome. I'm just going to pull up a quote that I found really useful. Sorry about that. Yes, so this is a quote from Borges's story on exactitude in science. I'm just going to read it out, and maybe our panelists could respond to that. In the empire, the art of cartography attained such perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire the entirety of a province. In time, those unconscionable maps no longer satisfied, and the Cartographers Guild stuck a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire, and which coincided point for point with it. The following generations, who were not so fond of the study of cartography, as their forebears had been, saw that this vast map was useless, and not without some pitilessness was it that they delivered it upon the inclement seas of sun and winter. In the deserts of the West, still today there are tattered ruins of the map, inhabited by animals and beggars. In all the land, there is no other relic of the disciplines of geography. So, passing it on to...
Hi, my name's Genevieve Hoffman. Thanks to Mohini and Caroline and everyone for organizing this event. Yeah, that Borges quote definitely resonates with me just in the job of what data means and what it can actually inform you about the world around us. I think we're at the point where we understand that data is embedded in everything we do. We're constantly creating it in terms of the things we talk about online and the digital way it gets collected and captured. But just thinking about cartography and how we've always tried to make sense of the world in images and wayfinding tools, there is that constant sort of push and pull of what you deem important enough to include and what you decide, doesn't necessarily need to be called out specifically. So that kind of decision making involves a lot of, the people in power tend to be the people making those decisions. That's always at play and something that I try to keep in mind just when I get a data set and start to work with it. I could go on a long time, but I'm sure our other panelists have thoughts on this too. But yeah, I think it's just a very important kind of criticism to have when we encounter data, because it does have this air of authenticity, and just thinking a little bit more about the decisions that made into how it was put together is really crucial.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Parrish. I'm a poet and computer programmer and artist. I am mostly interested when I look at this quote at what the animals and the beggars are doing. Because when I think about my own practice, it's really that. It's like all of these big, powerful organizations make these data structures, these abstractions for the world, systems, and at least the way that I view my role as an artist is to basically like make fun of that, like to take the ruins of that that massive institutional concept of what the world is, and then play around in it, and by playing around in it, point out the way that it is faulty, and maybe also the way that it is like weird and strangely beautiful, and so yeah, I'm interested. Like, I look at that quote and I'm wondering, like, you know, did Borges think that that was a way of saying that the tattered ruins of the map were useless by saying that now, oh, it's just for animals and beggars, but animals and beggars are pretty great. Like that's the crowd that I want to hang out with. That's the somebody should write a sequel to this story that's just like about the cool like punk life that's being lived by the animals and beggars and the tatters of that map.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. Yeah, it's a cool quote. It's good. Borges did well. I like thinking about, so I think what I like about the quote is how I think it speaks to the fact that we're only as good as the representations that we use. And it makes me think a lot about maps, because I think a lot about maps anyway. And about the nature of, like, the way that maps project this really great, like, authority, which I say is great because it means that it's something that, as artists, we can exploit. So that means that we can, like, take those tools and subvert them and try to take that same, like, authority and legitimacy that's projected and use it for totally different means, as some other panelists, I think, have spoken about earlier today. But yeah, that's what I think about. I'm like, what are the possibilities? What can we do with this?
So I broke format a little bit since I just jumped into questions without introducing our panelists. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to backtrack and introduce you guys. And then we can maybe go through some of your work and then like just have a general conversation about this. So Genevieve Hoffman is an artist and designer whose work renders complex systems in tangible forms. Her practice is grounded in research and intertwines data mapping and metaphor. After receiving her master's degree from the Interactive Telecommunications program in NYU in 2012, she spent the following year there as a research fellow and has also been in residence at SVA's Visible Futures Lab, Autodesk's Peer 9 workshop. Her work in interactive documentary has been featured at IDFA Doc Lab and was nominated for an Emmy. Genevieve currently works at the Office for Creative Research, a multidisciplinary design studio exploring new modes of engagement with data. Genevieve, would you like to?
Yep, that's my slide. So yeah, so the title of this panel was sort of framed as digital storytelling and data. And I'm going to speak a little bit about how narrative works in how I approach data in both my own art practice and then the work that I do in digital documentaries and at the OCR. The personal work I want to talk about is I started working a lot researching financial data and kind of realized that the way that I try to make sense of what can be really complex is often in metaphor. And this is not a tool that is specific to data or anyone. It's just a very common narrative approach. And when I was looking at the way people were talking about the financial system, it's often sort of in this kind of environmental, catastrophic, sort of weird, like typhoon or storm or weird sort of crisis. And I think it sort of speaks to the fact that we don't necessarily want to think of the financial system as something with controls in place or things that we can actually regulate, but this sort of complex, overwhelming thing that has a life of its own, much like the weather. And so I sort of leverage that approach a little bit. Well, sorry, it's not just journalists who tend to do that, but actual financial insiders sort of speak to what they do in terms of metaphors as well. So when I was looking into high-frequency trading, there are these algorithms that are called iceberg orders, and sort of the approach is to disguise the fact that you want to buy or sell large amounts of stock at once by kind of chopping them up into smaller amounts. And so maybe one trade will be just the very tip of what will be a much larger order. And so that was really evocative to me, sort of these people that are engaged in this like very complex financial system and like thinking of it in this environmental metaphor. And I had all these ideas about how, you know, the environment is really crucial into how this whole system is running. And I just kind of ran with that metaphorically and decided to render these algorithms in like as close to the metaphor as I could get, so as little ice cubes. So this is sort of taking data from oil companies that are actively drilling in the Arctic and rendering them as these sort of little data cubes. And I also kind of got really obsessed with high-frequency trading, just the kind of imperceptible timescale that it operates on. So it's all happening basically like 65,000 trades happens before you even like blink an eye, which is like way too crazy to even comprehend. This is sort of just a little chart that kind of goes through perceptible time scales and algorithmic time scales and how it's like completely logarithmic and very hard to ascertain. So I was just trying to think about like, what is the system we've created for ourselves where humans and machines, computers are trying to work together in ways that's just set up completely to fail? How can people sort of get ahead of these? Well, they can't get ahead, but how do they even start to engage in trading with these little algorithms? So I started sort of experimenting. Is this going to play? Cool. With starting to perform these algorithms, just trying to figure out like, okay, what is this machine actually doing? What would it sort of mean for a person to actually engage, satirically, of course, but like engage with that system in our own sort of timescale. So what it's doing, what these actors are doing is sort of incrementing the price of the trade by a penny at a time, and then sort of just deciding that, oh, it met the threshold. So now, no, he's keeping going. But yeah, it just kind of gets to the absurdity of like, this is obviously not a system sort of intended for humans to participate at, and it's pennies essentially is how it operates. So the more pennies that you happen to shift back and forth along the table, the more you are going to profit. I want to shift gears a little bit and speak to the project that Mohini mentioned. It's the most sort of traditional digital storytelling project that I've worked with. It was I was the developer on creating the web experience for what was a very much transmedia documentary endeavor. This is a project called Empire, and the directors are Kel O'Neill and Alina Jongsma, a Dutch and American filmmaking team. And this project deals with the legacies of the Dutch East India Trading Company and sort of like the remnants of what their colonialist history has really done for sort of small pockets around the world. And so they'd like spent 4 years collecting this video footage. It had been sort of premiered at festivals and installed in galleries. And so I was trying to figure out ways of taking sort of 2-channel and 3-channel video installations and having them make sense in a web context. And so there were a few things that I just, thought. One, this piece was installed in a room and you could, it shared a soundtrack and you could go on either side of it. And so sort of the obvious thing to do online, if it's gonna work, is it gonna work? Anyway, you flip the canvas so you sort of have a choice of what you're, is that gonna work? What you're looking at? Oh, there we go, okay. Anyway, can't hear a sound, but. The next one has some sound which you might wanna hear, and there's a Momo one which might be good, but Oh, technology. Okay. Maybe that just didn't have sound. But then the last piece I wanted to talk about. Yeah, so this is a 3-channel installation that didn't actually make sense to like give you the spatialized experience, but there is a data component layer which you can kind of see as this overlay that actually speaks to the way that the film is structured as a narrative. So the 3 channels deal with either Ghana, Suriname, or Brazil, and are looking at sort of pockets of this is a man whose family or ancestors were Dutch and they were slave traders, and he's sort of, you know, talking about the legacy of being that in that family did for him. And so it shifts to start showing footage of Suriname or Brazil. So it's, I thought actually the overlay worked really well to kind of hit home the point of how this filmmaking process is actually working. So it's not interactive so much, but it does kind of give you a better picture of how this narrative is structured. At the OCR, the Office for Creative Research, we work in a lot of different mediums, sort of traditional screen-based visualization. We've done data-driven public artworks. We have a print journal, which maybe some of you came across. And we do work in sort of more traditional narrative, data-driven storytelling. This is a project that lets you in real time follow sort of an expedition in Botswana. So it's been going on for the past 3 years. It's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. And the explorers, it's like a collaboration between National Geographic and the Wildlife Bird Trust. They're wearing sort of GPS watches and sensors, and you can kind of get a sense for how, like what type of animals they're encountering. You saw that them kind of slow down before they saw that big herd of water buffalo, which probably makes sense to slow down before encountering. But you know, it's sort of hard. It's essentially an abstraction of what's a very kind of amazingly rich, diverse location. I think we do embed some photos, so if you, get up there, you can kind of see it. But this is sort of a map-based endeavor and really sort of like bringing you along on the expedition. But the project that I really think is, I don't want to say completely, it's not as much about digital storytelling, but it does a really interesting job of performing a narrative entirely based on a data set. This is a project that we did last spring in MoMA, where alongside the collections database information they released information about sort of all of the artworks that have been acquired over the course of the last century. It had information about the titles, the artists, the date of creation, dimensions, when it was acquired. Didn't have the prices. That would have been really interesting, but they didn't release that. But sort of the interesting thing about this data set is that it's entirely text-based. There's no imagery. And when you're thinking about, you know, the MoMA data collection, you would think images might be front and center. But this kind of pushed people into different directions for how they might work with it. So there was a blog post by 538 where they kind of did some data science techniques to analyze it. There's, you know, different dimensions that are more popular, different dates that most of the works were acquired. And it's a great way of looking at this data set, but it doesn't sort of give you, I don't know, a really good peek into the content or maybe the politics of how this data is working. And so we basically built an API for the MoMA Collections data set, and we just started building up queries of it. So this query was asking for the most popular first names of all the artists in the collection. And so if you read it, you can see that I think it's maybe the 18th most popular first name is Mary, and it's the first woman who sort of appears. We started building up, just teasing out patterns in the titles. So this query is made up of sort of a iterative chain where you ask it for the first word and it returns a similar title that's a bit longer, and you can kind of recursively do this process. And so you go from girl to head of a sleeping woman. You might go from boy to Pier 18, parked island barges on the Hudson, New York. Fire to something in San Francisco. There's always the cursing that can be interesting. But then we were really trying to figure out, how do we represent this data set in a way that does it justice? How do we sort of bring it to life? Visualization didn't seem appropriate in the context of a gallery that's already, much more interestingly rendering the collection in real life. So we decided to partner with an experimental theater company called Elevator Repair Service, and really went on the endeavor to perform the database. So I want to play a short clip that sort of...
Milking the cow, chasing the geese, loving the alien.
Things better left unsaid, too.
Yes. The Connecticut River. The Avenue of the Allies, the Fulton Fish Market.
Invisible cities.
Yes. Caroline Flieger, Emily Feather.
Women on the beach.
The Plumed Horsewoman, the Midget and the Dwarf, the Marquis de Sade pig.
Bathers with 2 goats.
Yes. Manipulating a fluorescent tube. Picking the Christmas card for teacher.
A Million Ways to Come, number 2 of 16 from the series Do Not Abandon Me.
Throwing the plate from very high, manipulating a fluorescent tube.
13 Ways to Use Emmett Williams' Skull.
Leaving a fire in drenched raincoat and helmet.
Ways to Explore with a bag containing a radio, a glove, an orange, and a packet of cotton wool.
Yes. Quanting the Gladden. Emptying the fridge. Touching the void.
The Simple Things.
Watching the dancers.
Blackfire.
Phases of the Moon.
Quanting the
Poster
Gladden.
of the French National
Pulling the
Railroad.
marsh hay.
You get
Pieces
the
of the
idea.
Sky.
Posters of the French National Railroad.
Carrying the
Fire.
skeleton.
Yeah.
Quanting the Gladden.
Real estate
Fire
opportunities.
Child.
Yes.
Little Tinker Child, Ireland.
Pass.
Child with such
It was a really fun performance. It lasted about 40 minutes. People listening were wearing headsets, and you could sort of wander around the gallery and kind of come in and out of the performers. But yeah, I think bringing performance and data together is something that I think is a little bit unexpected. People are usually used to sort of sonifying data or visualizing data, and when you're speaking data, it's this weird, new, sort of unexpected approach. And so I think it's sort of ripe for use in storytelling.
I'm using your computer, actually.
While you guys set up, can I just introduce you, Allison? So Allison Parrish is a computer programmer, poet, educator, and game designer who lives in Brooklyn. Her teaching and practice address the unusual phenomenon that blossoms when language and computers meet. She holds a master's degree from NYU's ITP program and a BA in linguistics from UC Berkeley. Allison has held fellowships and residencies as well as teaches a course on writing computer programs that generate poetry at ITP. Allison, you ready?
Yes. This one's live, right? Okay. That bio sounds very different when it's read out loud. I might have to change it. I wanted to talk about a couple of. First of all, I don't know how I ended up on this panel because I hate storytelling. I just really don't like narrative as a form at all. I don't identify with it or think about it all that much. I'm a poet. Poetry is the anti-narrative. I try not to tell stories in any way, but instead assault your senses in other ways using words. So I wanted to talk about a couple of my projects that in the context of that quote have to do with like playing in the tattered remains of the maps left behind by obsolete institutions. So this is and most of the work that I make is in the form of Twitter bots. So this is a Twitter bot that I made called Every Word. Every Word, as you can kind of see here, this is like from very close to the end of Every Word. It was tweeting every word in the English language in alphabetical order, one word every half hour. It started in 2007. It was actually a project that I made at ITP. And ended almost 2 years ago now. I don't know why I'm still talking about this project. Maybe just because it's so fun to talk about. So part of the idea of this project was like to critique the idea that there could be a list of every word in the English language. People think that the dictionary is a map of the English language, right? And if something is in the dictionary, then it counts as language. Or if it is not in the dictionary, it does not count as language. So part of the idea of the project was to say, like, well, if we can list every word in the English language, is that actually possible? Or are there spaces that are left behind by that? So the interesting thing that happened with this Twitter bot is that it was tweeting all these words in alphabetical order, and then when it got to Zymergy, after that it tweeted eclair. And the reason for this, of course, is that there was a bug in the sorting algorithm that when computers look at a list of letters, they just know to sort them in numerical order, and the number for this E with an accent comes after the number for this Z, which means that eclair came after Zymergy. But lots of people were waiting for this. The bot had about 100,000 followers at this point. And so when eclair was tweeted, there's going to be some strong language on this page. I apologize for that. This is the thread in response to eclair, where everyone is just like, oh my God, what happened? People were confused, and I haven't actually looked at this thread in a really long time, and now I kind of feel bad about making all these people feel this way. So this is an example of how, like, maybe I should scroll until it gets to a place where I can actually talk about this. Okay, all right. This is an example of, like, not only is like the idea of coming up with a catalog of all the words in a language weird, because we come up with new words all the time. Language, as any system in the real world, can't be codified, can't be turned into like an artifact. But also computers in particular, when you give them language, do really weird things with that language, things that are unintuitive, things that go against your expectations. So I think a lot of the work that I make has to do with that idea of, like, well, computers can only represent data in a discrete format. Language is not something that you can represent digitally because it's behavior in the real world. So what are the weird things that happen when you have to put language into a computer? So this is a more recent bot that I made. This is called Mixed Reactions. So this was inspired by the new Facebook reaction widget. So as you might know, if you use Facebook, they recently added other options to the like button. So instead of having only two ways to react to content on Facebook, you either like it or you don't like it. Now you can like it or love it or haha it or yay it or wow it or sad it or angry it. Also today they added a custom one. I guess for Mother's Day there's like a flower. You can put a flower on a post. So they're doing like seasonal holiday versions of this as well. And this is a Medium post that the designers at Facebook wrote about this process, about how they went through all of their data about the kinds of comments that were posted and the stickers that people used, and then basically came up for what is essentially this universal rubric for human emotion, right? Like they broke it down and they discovered that, well, essentially when you get down to it, they assert that these are like the 7 things that people can do with their hearts towards each other. And I thought, well, that's extremely arbitrary. And whenever you think about, well, that's a system that's arbitrary, in my mind, I think, well, I can make another system, a system that imagines that even more arbitrary than the way that they imagined it. So I made this Twitter bot that basically puts a collection of 6 random emoji together and posits that this could be this instead could be the Facebook reaction widget. So here's one where it says 578 people confounded this. I think this is the confounded emoticon. You can react with the facts button on this. Whoops, oh my God, I don't. This is logged in as the OCR, so I'm trying to be very careful to not accidentally retweet one of these things. Why did he Statue of Liberty my post? We may never know. So another bot that I made, this will be the last one that I talk about, is Deep Question Bot. So this is a bot that creates these random questions, like I tweeted one, a pretty good one earlier. Arts are kept in interest, so where do you find on? That's not a very good one. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. Why must an ecstasy be an emotion? Why are ice boxes found in homes? Why is a man found near a conference? Asks this question. So the way that it works is there's, or the inspiration and also the raw material for this is this database called ConceptNet. This is used in artificial intelligence research. It's basically a curated database of common sense facts. Sorry, I'm holding the mic in one hand, so I can't give that as effective scare quotes as I want to. So basically you look up something like, let's look up the word iron in this database. And so you get all of these facts about iron. So iron, the concept of iron is related to the concept of metal through the relationship of is-a, or the concept of iron is related to the concept of hit golf ball by the concept of used for. So it's supposed to be this database, this comprehensive database of all common sense knowledge. I thought that was a ridiculous idea because common sense is always tactical and relational. It's something that only exists in the context of a situation. It's not an absolute fact about the world, even if you can start, an opera is not boring, is it still an opera? So I made this bot that just takes these common sense facts and rephrases them as questions so that the computer, instead of asserting these facts, is questioning them, which basically makes a bot that ends up sounding sort of like halfway, or sort of like a 4-year-old and also sort of like someone who's super high, which I think is an interesting thing to be able to evoke with, it's a good space, yeah. So that's kind of my reaction to that Borges quote. I will give it over to Mimi.
Awesome. So I'm just going to quickly introduce Mimi's work. Mimi Onuoha is an artist and researcher using data and code to explore new forms of storytelling, social critique, and interaction. Her work focuses on the overlap of digital and geographic spaces as embodied through data sets representing social structures. Recently, she served as a research fellow at Columbia University's Tao Center for Digital Journalism and an adjunct professor at NYU. Currently, she is a fellow at the Data and Society Research Institute, where she's combining ethnographic research methods with emerging data practices to investigate missing data sets and strategies for crowdsourced data collection.
Thank you. That is so weird. Hearing it's very, you were talking about spoken word and data. I'm like, never again. Hello, hi everyone. I'm gonna fly through. I'm gonna talk about some things I've done, but mainly I don't wanna talk about them. I wanna talk about things I'm thinking about, which you're not supposed to do at something like this. But this is technically an unconference, so I think that means can do whatever I want, right? All right, okay, cool. All right, so these are some things I'm pretty interested in. Moment of data collection, data as a relationship, and highlighting invisibilities. I'm not gonna explain any of them at all. You'll see in a minute. This is also a presentation I used somewhere else, so this photo is me just talking about how I spend a lot of time doing things. So this is a project that I did. I'm an artist and researcher. Like my bio said, I work with data and code and kind of am exploring interaction, social structures, et cetera. I really like thinking about data as a process. And I'm gonna kind of get to that at the end, but maybe you'll see that a bit. So this is a project I did last year when I was in London, and it's called We Are Searching For. And what I basically did, I was at the Royal College of Art, and there are a lot of public computers there. Anybody can use them. And I don't know if, I assume most of you know this, but your browser histories are stored locally on these computers. If I have access to your computer, I can find all the words that you've been searching for, like in different browsers. So I went to all of these public computers and grabbed all of those words that people had been searching for and gathered them all together and put them on this big print, which was super big. It was meters, I don't know, it was big. And put them all together there. And it was kind of fun. It kind of ended up being this like collection of the artifacts of a community. And so things that people had been searching for, and it did this thing that I love, which is that I like to work with people and I like to work with data. And most people who work with those things don't work with both of them. What it means for me is that I often work with the people whose data I'm also working with, which produces this weird kind of thing where I don't get to be removed and like just talk about APIs and like services. I'm like have to look people in the face. And so something like this I showed this at a show at the RCA, and people at the RCA were the ones showing things. And so, of course, they were all there looking at the things that they had been searching for that was then projected for everybody else to see. And there were things like people were finding their names in it. You get to see lots of very cool human things, like how, I don't know if you can see it in any of these, but like people will misspell a name and then like be like, shit, okay. Maybe it's all like, no. And then they like do it again and you can see it. And it just kind of prompted this relationship that I was interested in. And really at first it forced people to think about this question of how I collected it kept coming up, where people were like, how'd you grab this? Is this okay? I don't know. But that's kind of the space I'm interested in, is how do we get data? Rather than just thinking about data and storytelling as you like finding a data set and then representing it somehow, I'm far more interested in like, how did that data get there in the first place and what does that mean? And then this is this other project I'm gonna talk about because I spent a long time working on it. That's really the main reason I'm going to talk about it. This was also in London. So I got this Fulbright grant to go to London. Don't know how, but I got this Fulbright grant to go to London and collect data on people, and with their permission. And what I did was I worked with these 4 groups of people who had existing relationships to each other. So there was, so this is a site. It's on National Geographic, and I worked with these 4 people. One was a family. It was a family in the week before they were about to have a baby, and then the first 3 weeks of the baby's life. Then there was a group of coworkers who were also friends. There was a group of roommates where one of them was about to move away, and then these 2 people in a long-distance relationship. And what I did was I gathered their geolocation data, like latitude and longitudes from their phones for the course of a month, and then took that and basically visualized it. I think I've got a video maybe in here. I don't. Okay, well, this is like animated on the web, on nationalgeographic.com/pathways. And so what it did was it was telling the story of their data, but what it really was telling was how much like you can't really find out from the story of their data. There are some things you can find out. So this group of coworkers, you can see it because like I said, it animates on the site. One thing that I could tell was that 2 of them, I don't know if you can, this is hard to see, but there's an orange and pink line, and those 2 actually spend more time with each other than they do with the blue one. And they were all friends and coworkers. And so I brought this up to them, of course, because like I said, I work with people and their data. And I was like, so it looks like you 2 are closer than this one. And they were like, nah, not true. Months later, those 2 moved in together. I was like, I predicted this by looking at your data. But so that was kind of a cool story that came out of it. But the best part about that was that if I had just been collecting their data, I could have told them this, but because I was working with them, they then filled in all the blanks for me. So it turns out the blue one is in a serious relationship. The other 2 were single. They were like, this is what it is. It's not that we're closer. What it really is just that this one has more things occupying their time. And so this was really what this project was about. Ostensibly, it was about data visualization, but it wasn't really at all. It was really about this process of interacting with people and thinking about their data and like kind of teasing this out and seeing what happens when all of us work together. I told you there was this family. Theirs is really cool because I used a different app for them. I used Moves, which is owned by Facebook, so I can't recommend it. But the other one is OpenPaths, which is much better. Much worse, but open source. It's hard. But so the great thing about theirs was, like I said, they were about to have a baby, and you can really see how I don't know if you can even see it, but there's a blue line, and that's the mom. And you can't really see her move around a lot because she's super pregnant. But there's this one point, because like I said, it animates for the whole month, and you can see like the moment when she moves and goes to the hospital, and you can see like this child actually being like this. You're like, oh, that's when the child is being born, and then the grandmother comes in, and the father comes, and it's just a really kind of interesting story, and there's just a lot that's wrapped up in there. And that experience, I actually like met with the family a lot and met this child, and it was fun. Oh, and then I told you I worked with also a long distance couple who, so this is, I have more, just showing a snapshot here, but I collected their data for 5 weeks. And you can see the blue one, the first person is the blue one, the yellowish orangey one is the second one, and you can see that one of them sends more messages. And you can start to learn things like that they like respond very quickly to each other. There's 1 week where they don't send any messages at all because, any guesses? Why? They're together. Yeah, right. So, and you can really see this on their map because they like fly around a lot, and then you see that they come to the same place, and then no messages are sent between them. And it's like a story of the story for. So I did this for National Geographic, and again, that story is really about. Like data visualization is so cool because you can take data and like display these stories. But that is not at all what I was interested in. What I'm really interested in is this like interaction I had with them, and in looking at them like being willing to give me their data and then like wanting to talk with me and what we found out in the course of that. And they're still like tracking themselves now. So, your art can have consequences. But that's stuff I did in the past. This is what I'm working on now, which is nothing. Or really the things that are missing. So I'm like, as my bio said, I'm at Data and Society, and I'm a fellow there. And the thing that I'm really working on is what I call missing data sets. And so there are these blank spaces in otherwise data like saturated contexts. And the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is how all data, we talk about data and storytelling as if like you find the story, like you get this data set and then you just find the story in it. But in reality, all data already are a story. There are already lots of forces that have gone into place to sort of massage it to mean and look like something. And what I'm really interested in is rewinding, and rather than thinking about having data and then being able to do all these sorts of techniques and analyses to figure things out about it, I'm much more interested in why do we have this data and why don't we have other types of data, and why who collected it and why was it collected and what does that mean? So this project I'm working on now is really just investigating what are spaces where there are no data, and how is that sometimes very powerful and empowering, and other times like a way of erasure. That's the space I'm playing in right now. And I wrote a lot of stuff about it. You can, if you search missing data sets and Mimi, you'll see it all. Yeah, that's it. I'll stop.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So a recurring theme that I saw in something that you all spoke about was this idea of context, right? And how context can kind of alter the way we perceive the data or the way we consume it. And it just seems like there's different ways to acknowledge that context and different ways to unpack it. So one of the things I found really interesting about this keynote was its title. Both the term storytelling and data just have so much baggage. I'm not a huge fan of the term storytelling myself. I think it's been flattened a lot, like it doesn't really mean anything now. But I get pegged into spaces with storytellers a lot. And I find that to be an interesting and weird sort of relationship. And even with data, I feel like it's a term that implies objectivity and this kind of science feel that it cannot be wrong, it's not a lie. And I feel like both these words are in total conflict with each other. One is like a fiction around an idea in my head, and the other is the subjective thing. So I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about that.
Okay. I think, yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think we all in some way express some trepidation with that label, and yet here we all are. I think, yeah, some of this, I think, is something that is not, that we are forced to think about a lot now because of how data and storage, these are both kind of buzzwords. Mm-hmm. But at the heart of this, I think, is this sort of tension of classification and sorting that we're really coming up against, which is not new, but is exacerbated by new computational models and ways of doing things. But it's this need to be able to categorize things, which has a very like necessary like output, I guess, so that you can understand and communicate. But also, what do you do when things don't fit the categories? That's the tension of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what a lot of us are dealing with and coming up against. And I think I'm like it's rough, but I'm actually totally fine with that. I think that is a tension that we need to have, and that we need to keep on kind of pushing and fighting against.
Yeah, I can talk about that too. Yeah, data, of course, are not, facts. Like they come from people who have agendas. And when I hear storytelling, I mostly just think of like bedtime stories, And that's why I say like the work that I make isn't really like it's not storytelling even in like the loosest sense, because I'm not like you can't evaluate, or at least I try to make work that you can't evaluate by saying like, well, did that prove the point that it was setting out to make? The same way that you can't like listen to like a concerto or something like that, like a piece of music or a piece of choreography. But when I hear data and storytelling, mostly what I hear is just like this painful cry of like, please, please, please confirm my suspicions. Like, tell me that I'm right about the things that I already believe. And that's what a lot of the work in this field tends to do. A lot of the time is just like somebody gathers data that is already biased towards their own ideas, and then they make a visualization of it, and like, what do you know? The visualization shows you that you were right all along.
It's like a footnote in a sense, like
Right.
Like it's just like, yeah, somebody said it before me. It's not just me. Someone else also agrees with me, right?
Right, exactly. So that's why I like, being on the panel with the work that the other panelists have shown that are really more about like bringing that into question and finding alternate ways of taking data, acknowledging its bias, and then trying to find new ways of having people experience it.
Yeah, I'm sort of I'm very torn, because I think like there is a place for storytelling, and it is very engaging, and it's also like an easy tool that you can kind of just pull out and say like, I want to make a point, like here it is. I don't think that that's what I try to do when I'm working with data. I feel like the bigger challenge in what storytelling is like a very kind of easy way to go about it, but you really want to get people engaged in it, so they're asking their own questions and they're drawing their own conclusions. And so sometimes storytelling comes in as this like, here's the graphic that grabs you, and then maybe you want to like ask, play with the interface or see if there's other things that you can come away with. It's a hard tension. Like attention spans are limited, and it's not always what someone wants to do when they're encountering something online. So I guess I'm trying to make a little bit of a plea, like there's a place for storytelling in what we do. And I guess what I term it is more like metaphor. Like if I can kind of like use shape or use color or use like these, emoji or something that like grabs people and sort of gets the larger point of what I want to get across, like I totally go there. But having that be the whole experience is always, I don't know, I feel like that falls flat.
Are there any techniques that you use to sort of show these layers of context? Because my first sort of interaction with a data visualization was the New York City crime map from 2010. And the artist at Byfield had done kind of a scathing critique of it at a talk. And it was funny that was actually a map I'd seen because I'd moved to New York City in 2010, and my parents had seen it, and that's how we chose where I was living. And just kind of retroactively seeing how problematic our choices were was a very interesting thing. And I could also understand from a design perspective, visual design perspective, how could they have added more granularity? Like, yes, they did certain choices which are really messed up, but how could they add the breadth of granularity to that data set? Are there any ways that you in your practice have done something like that?
It's very difficult. Yeah, I feel like if the data, like the crime map, and that's sort of the point you want to get across. I did a project that was about like mapping darkness, and I sort of thought of it as like, it's a phenomenological way of experiencing the city. And then all these other people were like, well, I want to know where there's like not light and where I can go running at night, and all these like way more practical considerations that I was like, well, yeah, okay, like if that's the tool that you want it to be used for, that's great. But yeah, it was just interesting, those tensions of like everyone's bringing their own sort of agenda to the experience, no matter sort of what you have envisioned. I think something like a crime map is like inherently problematic.
Yeah.
And I always think of that sort of Laura Kurgan corollary where it's the $1 Million Blocks project, where it's looking at sort of the amount of money spent in each borough in New York, or I guess it's just Brooklyn, but sort of juxtaposing that with the incarceration rates. And sort of, I think when you do that, where you're juxtaposing data sets that you might not immediately think to have in the same context, you can start to sort of play with those biases.
Sure.
I will pass this along to you.
Awesome.
Oh, to answer.
Oh, okay. If you have something to add, then you should.
If there's anything to add, otherwise. So the whole question of context is really interesting to me. I moved back to India a few years ago for 2 years because of immigration stuff, and I had a lot of time there to kind of try to understand this modern phase in India right now, where there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of kind of data collection in general, and people are trying different things with it. Some of them are quite interesting. For me, though, I wanted to kind of explore the relationship between globalization and its impact on tribal communities at an art project, which kind of sank. And it sank because people were uncomfortable about the topic. But the way they would talk about the people involved in the indigenous areas was those people. They'd never kind of unpack what those people meant. And the sort of title those people applied to a lot of people in their urban surroundings as well. So I sort of took data visualization in like urban data, like census data, in terms of what resources and utilities are available somewhere, and just decontextualized it and made like this abstract map. And I wanted people to play out their stereotypes. I feel like I'm more comfortable with data-based objects not being tools, but being, for lack of a better word, more like stories. They're subjective, and they come from an intended perspective, and they express a certain breadth of the artist's kind of relationship with it, and they don't have to answer everyone's questions about everything. And I wonder if you guys have any work like this that maybe you have an engagement with that in a very kind of specific, subjective way. We don't show all the data, but maybe one part of it or one specific part of it for kind of one reason.
I mean, I think a general philosophy I like is, this is like against big data, but just show like the minimum amount of data that you need. But kind of like take a step back and think in terms of your question. I'm gonna bring it back to maps again. I said I would before. So something like a map is it's a prescriptive tool, but it's also meant to be like instructional, and it's meant to give you give you something specific. And so something like that can be used in a variety of contexts and is used in a variety of ways. And so you've got some maps which are mainly just meant to tell you how to navigate New York City, or you can have a map that's meant to show you crime, or you can have a map that's meant to kind of show you the military or like the prison industrial complex. And so they all are positioned in different ways, and they're all data, but they have different settings, right? So I think when you keep that in mind, that I guess just in response to your question, that to me is some of the trouble that we have with these things, is that because it can be used in so many different ways, it makes it really hard when those ways are mixing up against each other. Because it's true, I agree with what everyone said, and I think data are not objective. Totally subjective. They're totally subjective and are not neutral at all. And yet there are times when you need to use data to convey something and show something. And then in those cases, maybe there's still decisions you make that affect the way that it's perceived, and it's still collected in a certain way. But I think what I'm saying is that there are different spaces where it can be used, and maybe there isn't one way that, there's not one way to answer this. It's just depending on what your need is. And I guess mine is more artistic in nature for the most part, but I respect that other people have different.
Sure, absolutely. In an artistic context, do you use data in a kind of different way though? How do you maybe allow a user who doesn't know anything about the topic to understand your perspective? I guess I did a poor job of framing my question. But this is something I struggle with a lot, about defining the parameters of my exploration. So it's something the viewer can understand. And it's something I don't understand in a lot of data viz, so I feel like that's what I seek out. And I guess my question was, is this something you have engaged with, or any of you have engaged with, and what are these kind of tools or techniques with expression? Since I feel like everyone on this panel is kind of approaching data in a very different way. You have a more artistic approach, you have a more kind of poetic approach, and yours is more maybe for lack of a better word, the way we see storytelling and data together, right? And they're all very rich and exciting. And I'm really excited to learn more about how you guys engage with the data, I guess, because that's something I always struggle with. It's something so large and massive that I just get lost in it a lot. So I end up taking a corner and building on that corner. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of a thing that data does really well is give you the opportunity for comparison, and I think that's a lot of way we were talking about collection and categorization. I think it's just a way that you sort of make sense of things very easily. So, you know, multiple ways of seeing different things. I think a lot about actually like if you're trying to tease out meaning from data, what it means to like draw conclusions about an aggregate data set versus something that, you know, maybe these projects show really well where it's more sort of like these personal small moments. And I think the aggregate way of reading data always tends towards the more problematic and the more sort of kind of top-down, we understand things now, conclusions. But I think, yeah, I think there's just always the, I don't know, desire to like compare things, and that's what visualization does very well. I try and when I'm working with data, just sort of like do quick graphs and get a sense of sort of what the shape of it is. And I guess the shape can also mean things when I'm in a kind of using my art brain and sort of what materials I'm thinking about and like choices in, you know, what it's actually going to be in terms of medium. So yeah, I guess that's my approach. I don't know, there's many, but.
When I'm using data, I'm always trying to use it in two different ways. Like with the deep question bot piece, for example, like I'm trying to like critique the idea of this database even existing on the one hand, but then I'm also trying to use the structure of the database to like honestly, genuinely create textual artifacts that are interesting. So, and I don't know if it's like okay conceptually for me to try to do both, like to say on one hand, well, this thing it's garbage, and like, why would you even think that this is useful? And then say like, actually, this is really useful to do exactly the thing that I wanted to do. But I guess usually what I am trying to do is I'm trying to like create something that will help people understand viscerally the bias or the structure, not just of the data that the project is based on, but then also like the computational stuff that goes into it. And that's what's evident here, and that's, you know, kind of what every word is about. Yeah, I'll pass it on.
awesome. Caroline, do we have time for some questions? Awesome. I'd just like to open it up to the public.
Hello. So I think, Allison, you're kind of just bringing this up about like when you're dealing with all these like big conceptual questions about like how to wrangle the data, but then you also have all these practical concerns about what tools you're going to use and like knowing how to use those tools. And so how do you balance that in your work? And like, do you ask for help, or like, how do you approach that challenge in what you do?
You both just nodded and looked at me. So you're asking how to balance the conceptual and the practical, basically?
Well, when the tools are like changing all the time, and there's so much you can use, and there's like technical knowledge.
Yeah. I think for me, this process usually involves sort of a back and forth, like a constant, what is it that I'm trying to do? Okay, how do I do that? Oh, wait, that's not possible. Okay, wait, how else? What else? Like, what else? What am I, if I'm not able to do that, why am I not able to do that? What does that mean? Okay, what is this other thing I can do? All right, well, what does it show me that I can do this other thing? I feel like bouncing around that circle, I guess I've made it, is sort of the entire like first like steps of coming up with a project, which isn't, sorry, that's not like a very clear answer, but I think in my head it really is just, you're right, it's kind of this, it's just back and forth.
I guess you just shout. Yeah. Give it to me. It's raining. My question is sort of from a completely different angle. We're talking about having data and doing something with it. I'm interested in, from your perspective and all the work you've done, which evidences a utility to data that may have flaws. From your perspective, what is it like to create data sets ethically? What is it like to set parameters for new data that's being collected that is mindful of all of these concerns that we are raising?
I actually have this.
Got you. Excellent. I'm so happy to give you one.
Okay, so for me, there are a couple of things I think about. I always think about this. I wish there was like a list of like responsible data, like procedures. And I think one thing that's really big is longevity, like how long a data set lives is really important. So if you're collecting something on, the thing about data sets is that if you just collect them, they can be used for any other purpose, right? It's like you could be like, oh, we collected this to do whatever thing that's good. Oh, so a good example is the case of the New York City the new ID, NYC, thank you. Yeah, so, those are partly meant to be a strategy that's supposed to help undocumented peoples. So if you have this data set that a lot of undocumented peoples have, is that if that gets into the wrong hands, you can totally do correlations to try to figure out who those peoples are when they were trying not to be recognized before, right? This won't happen because there are some stipulations in place to make sure it won't. But this is what I mean is that data sets outlive the reason for their creation. And so being able to think ahead and think what could this be used for is really important, but you can't always predict that. So one way that you can get around that is thinking about how long something lives. And just having sure kind of place measures, it's set for that. That's something I think about a lot. And then other things are that I think often the groups who collect are not necessarily the same as the people who make up the collected, and that is a real problem in my books. And the fact that there's such a big gap between those two things, I think narrowing that gap could do a lot could do a lot. And then the other, we could talk after. I think there's so many points at which bias can enter a lot of these things. And the thing I'm told you, I'm really focused on missing data sets and spaces where the ways by which people collect data eliminate some populations. So for instance, if you're a hospital and you're doing patient satisfaction surveys and your surveys are sent out via telephone, any patients who come in who don't have a home or don't have a phone number are never going to be represented in your data, and then you will design new structures based off of that, and it just reinforces. Or predictive policing is another example. It's so just thinking about who really makes up those populations is also super important. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, those are all amazingly excellent points. I just want to speak to one more. I think being really transparent about what you're doing is key to building trust, because as much as, I don't know, I'm very wary of many corporations and government bodies that know things about me, it's more that I don't know sort of what their end game is all the time. And I think if there was a little bit more just open communication, or if terms of services were things that you could actually digest as you're looking at them, I think it would do a lot just to create sort of more understanding of what all of this data is being used for, and hopefully just get people sort of on board, maybe, if it's not going to be used for something that they disagree with. Yeah, it's something that we're trying to be very conscious of in a project we're developing. So yeah, it's key.
I'll take a stab at this too. I think it's important to, it has to be, again, it has to be tactical. It has to be something that's happening individual choices on a very micro level. I think something that's important, it's important to have a lot of different voices contributing to who is designing your data, who's designing your database schema. There needs to be a lot of different people that have input on that. And you need to be very conscious, I think, why you are distinguishing between things in your data. There's a series of great blog posts that are I forget the names of them, but it's everything you know about names is wrong. And it shows how even though a lot of computer programmers, for example, just take it for granted that people have a first name and a middle name and a last name, that's not true for basically 95% of the population of the world. And if you design your database with that assumption in mind, then you're going to basically make it difficult for a huge number of people to use your software. And that goes for things like your address or your phone number or gender or whatever. So I think being conscious about, like, when you are adding a new field to your database, just think like, well, why am I doing this? Like, what is the ultimate purpose of me having this field in the database? If it's just like, well, that's how it's always been, then you're probably like, then you are definitely, almost certainly perpetuating bias.
Sure.
It's more of a comment than a question, so feel free to respond or agree or disagree, or not say anything at all. But I'm just gonna like kind of, I think there's something that's really, for me, gratifying is that I see in a lot of your work this kind of idea of questioning data collecting itself. And for me, like a historical critique of data visualization and data-driven projects would be the fact that a lot of data collecting and data visualization comes from a colonial project to an extent an ethnographic standpoint, right? Where like, you know, we are going to kind of break down these things and study these patterns. And kind of that will create a canon of knowledge to an extent that's applicable to everything. And centuries later, the same kind of driving force behind the colonial project still exists and still using data visualization in a very simple manner. So I think kind of your poetic playing with the very act of like collecting data itself, which is present in each and every work. Like it's that you're doing something to data and you're doing something with data being collected like very early on in the process, right? It's not like, you know, you are trying to kind of intervene or to kind of like kill something before it's born to an extent, or kind of just like mutate it in a way that's beneficial. And I kind of really appreciate that, and I think and another thing that I appreciate is the fact that there are kind of explicit stances that the work takes towards data and data collection, to varying degrees, but like that you can kind of tell where you are ethically on the act of collecting data and portraying it in other works. So yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks everyone for coming to Facets. This was our second year. Oh, thanks. You're welcome. Thank you. Wait, hold on. This is not on.
This one's probably, that one's one of them's just sarcastic.
Hi everyone. Thank you for coming. This was our second year. I think it was a really great weekend. I hope all of you had a really fantastic time. That's it. Can we get a round of applause for our final keynote panel? Right. Yeah. I'd like to give a really big thank you to our volunteers throughout the entire weekend. Some of them have already left, but they were really amazing, as well as a big hand for Mohini. And Adele. Phoenix, who is somewhere around here. Yeah. Oh, as well as Julie from the Internet Society, who's been live streaming this entire event. Thank you so much. And we'll see y'all next year.